EMYO, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here this morning.
I'm glad to get a chance to talk with you. I have so many questions. Looking at your background and your incredible experiences as an artist, your multicultural experiences, I would love to hear about your background with your family, your heritage, and your art, and how you got to be where you currently are in your career. And then we'll circle back and talk about what you're exactly doing right now.
Yes, I was a creative little girl. From my earliest memories, when I had unstructured time, I wanted to make things. And I also really loved to draw, and I just drew from life all the time. My favorite thing was just a pile of white paper and pencils. And I was always drawing people, drawing the still life that just happened to be on my table. And I was drawing from life. So in some ways, I had an art education that I gave myself from the very beginning. I didn't know that was what was happening. We didn't have a lot of art supplies at my house. I didn't have a lot of access to space to make a mess or to explore other mediums other than drawing. But in some ways, that just allowed the foundations of perspective and drawing from sight to really become established very firmly in my life. Then I had an amazing art teacher in high school who was the first person who put a paintbrush in my hand and canvases and supplies and room to make a mess. And she's the one that said, okay, what if we take this eye and this artistic ability, what if you transfer it into another language, the language of painting? And so that's where my impressionist painting voice began, which was very different than my drawing voice. And so I had a really great art education in high school, but I went on to study English literature and communication in college, but continued to always be painting and engaged in the creative arts. And I went on to study after college with an impressionist master in Italy, where we really focused on sight, paying attention to what we really saw and training the eye to paint according to form, texture, color. And painting in Italy with this impressionist master helped to refine my style and helped me to be more confident in the way I was going to express my painting voice. So I began on this painting career almost 20 years ago, and little bit by little bit began to bring art out into the world and have had it collected by, various people all over the country, little bit by little bit over the years. And it's been an amazing journey.
Yes, it sounds like it has been. Now, how did you connect with this artist, the professor or teacher in Italy, and where in Italy were you?
I was in Lake Como, Italy, and participated in an impressionist workshop with the artist Jerry Friscia.
So you're doing full-time art now, right? You're a full-time fine artist?
I am, but let me tell you a little bit about my life. I have 6 children.
Wow.
And my art career was growing along the same time as I was also growing my family. And the amazing thing for me as an artist is that I was able to set my own hours and work in the times that made best sense for me. And so even though there were years of newborns and little babies and toddler stages, I was able to structure work time around nap times, evenings or early mornings, so I could be really present during the early years of raising my children. I then went on to educate my children at home for their early years. So I have said that I have worked 2 jobs.
And then some, and then some.
Yes, and then some. So I established a studio practice of early morning studio time about 10 years ago. I say that I greet each day with art, and I roll out of bed and I put on my painting overalls that are vintage American Eagle circa 1996. I've been painting in them for all those years. Put on my overalls, I grab my coffee, and I head to the studio. So I have a very disciplined practice, and I watch the sunrise as I'm working. The reason why that studio practice has been so important to my work is that I need to be able to get into a flow where I can work totally uninterrupted for a large amount of time. And because I had 6 children in 8 years, that means that for a lot of years, I have had a lot of interruptions. But the early morning was the time that I could absolutely protect and carve out. And so I did. In that time, I don't necessarily at 5 a.m. feel creative. But what I've learned over the past 20 years is that when I show up and begin, the creativity follows. And dipping my brush in the paint and turning on the music or podcast and beginning is the best way to get the creative to flow. Just showing up, fake it till you make it, and then it happens, has been the way that little bit by little bit my art has happened over the years.
Yeah, exactly. And I say that a lot on the show. And of course, Chuck Close said that as well, is show up and then the creativity comes.
Absolutely.
So if we were to look at your art practice as a business, it has a lot of facets. It's like a kaleidoscope. You're carried by 7 galleries. You offer commissions. You offer prints of your work. You're releasing a children's book, and you offer a coterie to connect designers that are looking for art for their clients. So how do you develop these avenues? For instance, was it an overall vision of yours to have these different branches to your business, or do you have someone managing the business side for you, or did it just evolve?
Well, I would say I think it is very important for anyone that's listening that is very young in their art career to know that this did not happen overnight. In fact, I believe if I had begun with all of these avenues in mind, that my actual artwork would not have been ready or at the place that it needed to be shown in the avenues that it is. So I just want to say for young artists out there, I think that the 20 years of developing voice and developing my unique way of seeing the world and producing over that time in a very slow and steady way is what has enabled the flourishing of some other avenues right now. And let me explain that. Back in the day, it was cold calling a gallery here and there with some examples of work. Would you be interested in showing my work? That's a very intimidating way to begin, but that is the best way to begin. And, I started back in the day where we didn't have social media. So galleries were the gatekeepers of the art world. While that is not necessarily always the case anymore, I do find that the gallery model is so vital and important to my work. It allows pieces to be seen in real time and real life. I say there's nothing like standing in front of a piece of art and smelling it, seeing it, experiencing it, touching it, having the full experience. And if you're just trying to show your work online, you miss a good deal of that. So I find that, yes, some collectors might shop my work in a gallery and might purchase from across the country, but it's most likely that at some time they have engaged with my work in real time, perhaps on a trip and they went into that gallery or in someone else's home. So I really, really am grateful and thankful for the gallery model. And that's how I began. And so I started in a couple, and then over the years, different galleries approached me as they became aware of my work. And I've developed wonderful partnerships with some really beautiful spaces and really lovely people over the years. And I always say I'm very grateful for my galleries because they're my face and my voice, because I'm at home painting and raising children. They are the ones that are out and about engaging with the clients and collectors. So galleries were the first inroad to beginning the business piece. I was asked for 18 years if I would ever sell prints. And for 18 years, I said no. And that was really important to me as well. I wanted to create good art over a long period of time before I allowed those pieces to be reproduced. And I built up a base of clients and collectors that were interested in my work over a long time, and they knew that the pieces were valuable. During COVID, I decided for the first time to make my art accessible via a limited release of prints because I wanted to extend art to more people that perhaps wouldn't be able to afford a fine art piece at this point in their life. And so I began the print journey. But again, to young artists, I started that 18 years into this journey. It wasn't quick and it was very careful. And I never want to take away from my fine art pieces, which are the main part of my business.
So, okay, question one. How many pieces did you have before you started that were finished, before you started approaching galleries? Did you have a collection of a certain amount of pieces that all went together?
I would say, now you're asking me questions from 20 years ago. So I would say yes. When I would work in a body of work in a group of pieces that feels cohesive and connected. I also think it is very important for the artist to spend time developing their own voice. I have said I kept my eyes down. I didn't look at everyone else's work. I wasn't constantly scouring. At this point, we didn't have social media, but I wouldn't have been one that was looking to see what was the hip and the hot and the trendy, because I wanted to remain very true to my voice and the way that I was looking at the world. And I think that has been one of the most important things I did, because I do think there's a lot of plagiarism and copying out there. And I think the galleries and I think the most discerning collectors sniff out that very easily. And so I would really recommend to younger artists or people that are beginning on this journey to be very careful what you're looking at. I said that I paid attention to the old masters. And I was always constantly going to art museums and looking at what was old rather than paying attention to everything everyone else was doing right now around me. So, yes, put together a body of work that is cohesive, that is collected, but it is also very uniquely you. And if you have not developed that yet, if you are young in that journey, just keep on working, just keep on developing, just keep on playing, exploring, creating, and developing who you are.
People ask me that, how do I find my creative voice? And I tell them, keep showing up, keep making your art. And I think that it's always been in there and it'll just reveal itself the more that you show up. But if you put in that amount of work, I think you're going to feel that click in place. So the second question I had when you were talking about prints was, you mentioned being careful not to dilute the power of your paintings with the prints. Do you think that that's possibly a different audience to extend your audience as opposed to compete with it if you're selling prints?
Definitely. Yes. But I chose to be very discerning and very careful with how I was going to release prints. I chose to release 4 series of prints a year. So, and they're very limited edition. And I release a series that is only available for a small amount of time once a quarter. I did that, yes, to extend the availability to perhaps a different audience. I've had several people say, this is how I'm collecting EMYO art now, but one day I hope to have a fine art piece. And it just allows more people to have art. And we all need art in our lives. So I'm glad to bring art to more people.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. And who do you do your prints through? How did you go about? It sounds like this is something that is project managed out, it's scheduled, you have a system. Do you do that? Do you have someone who handles that? Are they connected to the print shop that you use? Is it online printing? Tell me.
You know what? Let me give you a massive behind the scenes look into my life. I have the most amazing studio director. Her name is Emily Holmes, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Enneagram.
Yes,
That's
yes,
a
I am.
personality. Well, the Enneagram is a personality profile, and my studio director and I make a fabulous team because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, which means that I'm the creative, the individualist, the emotional one, and she's a 1, which is the get it done magic. And so she runs all of the logistics pieces of the print aspect of my business down to the ordering, the photography, the shipping details. And it has made all the difference in how I'm running a business to have a dynamic, super talented director behind the scenes.
Now,
So that has made a world of difference.
that's huge. Because I was going to ask you that. At what point did you hire a studio director? Because I keep thinking, if I had someone like that, it would be a game changer because there's certain things I don't say I don't have time for, but I'm choosing to put off. One of them is social media. I'm focused on either I'm podcasting, I'm doing the graphic design work that I do, or I'm at my easel, or obviously my family, not that they're an afterthought, but we're talking about career. But between all those things, that would be a game changer for me. So at what point were you able to put that in place and how did you go about it?
I hired my first assistant very early into the art journey for me. I first found a woman that was a collector of my work, that was in a stage of life where she didn't have young children and she could be in contact with stores and galleries. And she was my face out in the world, making deliveries or fielding phone calls. Once she moved away, and I hired another director that was connecting with designers that were interested in carrying my work. And then as my art career began to grow, I ended up transitioning to a studio director. So I really think I have had an assistant for the past 15 or so years. So that was probably about 5 years into the art world for me. And that has been a massive help, because as my studio director says, Emily, what you need to be doing is painting. So paint.
Yeah.
Don't get bogged down in these things, because that's not the best use of you. I think the question to ask is, what's your best yes? Anytime you're saying yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah.
So if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to a lot of things. So the question is, what's your best use of you?
That's right.
What can only you uniquely can do? Other people can do other things. So that's key. So we have really tried to discern where I should be spending my time and where my magic is. And it allows her to have her magic. And look what we've built.
Exactly. Okay, so this, I think, is a game changer, to be able to have a studio director, someone who can help you put all those schedules in place, keep things moving, manage the project side of what really needs to be a business, treat it as a business if you're going to be a successful artist, part-time or full-time. How did you get to the point where you had the studio director? It sounds like you put that person in place, as you said, 15 years ago. How were you able to implement that so early in your career?
Well, I just took any earnings that I was making from art and I set them aside and took a portion of that I was going to use towards paying someone to help me, because I looked at it as an investment into the business. And so the way I set up having an assistant or a studio director was I have them keep up with their office hours that they work, and then they are paid according to, how many hours are put in. And this allows for some seasons to have more hours needed, and there's some seasons that there's not quite as much work that goes in behind the scenes. Usually the girls that I've had working with me might be doing that part-time while they're doing something else. And it has just worked beautifully. My studio director right now has a photography business. And so she is busy photographing weddings on the weekends and running her own fabulous business, but then is able to take those administrative skills and work for me part-time. So that is how the finding dynamic talent has worked, to hire someone that's working for you on a project basis and uses office hours, a couple hours a week.
I think that really can be a game changer. And when I launched my courses, I went to Upwork and I actually hired a remote assistant because I didn't have someone available here in our small town who had the skill set and the availability at the same time, both pieces, to help me with that launch. And I found a phenomenal person to help me. And it sounds like, depending on what you need them for, unless they're physically coming to your studio to ship, they might even be remote, a virtual assistant.
Absolutely. That could be a really great option for somebody. So I actually found personally, though, art can be so solitary, and it must be solitary. I need to be all by myself in my studio working to be able to get into the mindset and the flow that I best create in. But what I found is as my business began to grow and grow, I was longing to be part of a team. And so bringing a studio director on and getting to grow my team has only added so much joy and connection as we get to brainstorm and collaborate and talk about the different avenues that art can find its way into people's hands. And so I've really, really loved the connection and the community that I've had working alongside of a really gifted studio director. And it's allowed me, I think, to make better art because I feel excited and encouraged, and I'm not just all by myself in my studio, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it actually, I'm the same way. I like people. I like to have my people around me. I've actually opted to do my graphic design work back in a corporate environment at this point, and I absolutely love it. And the reason was I was doing my graphic design from home, and I was so lonely and I was so isolated. And so it was nice to be able to do that for the time period that it served me. But going back to an office environment for those hours is important to me personally. I absolutely love what I'm doing and who I'm working with. And I think that as artists, we have to continue to look for what works for us and our personalities. As you said, with the Enneagram, I think finding that person that has the right personality to move the needle in the tasks that we need assistance with. Can we do them? Yes, we can. Of course, we're smart people, but is it our wheelhouse? Is it the thing that either we'd rather be doing or that we do best? Not necessarily. Even if we do it well, like you said, you need to be in your studio. And I need to maximize all the time I've got free in my studio as well. So maybe even a college student who is in that area of administrative pursuit would be great because you'd have somebody who would be open to picking up all the things, the technical things and the social media things. And I might even look for somebody who's over at the local college because that might be refreshing for me to bring in that perspective.
I think that's a wonderful idea. And with the studio director that I have right now, we often laugh because she said, I knew nothing about fine art when I joined you. And I said, I wasn't looking for an art expert. I was looking for someone that had that specific go-getter, administrative, detailed temperament and personality that I thought would make a great team member. So looking outside of the fine art world actually really was beneficial for me.
Now, did you make her take the Enneagram test first?
No, she knew it. She was already very self-aware and knew her skill set and knew what she was good at. So that's also something, working alongside of self-aware people that own their skills and are very confident in what they do well is an amazing way to build a team.
Yeah, I agree with you. It absolutely is. Now, how did the coterie come about? It sounds like it might have evolved out of your studio director who began to work with designers. They saw perhaps an avenue to connect designers who needed to find art for their clients.
At one point, I had a list of over 150 designers who had reached out to me and were interested in bringing my work to their clients. And so we made a very concerted effort to say, well, we really can't work with 150 people. That is too many. That doesn't make sense. What if we selected a very small group to build a relationship with? And so we set up something we call the Designers Coterie, where we allow different designers to submit an application to work with us. And then we select a very small group to allow to purchase work from me each year. And so the coterie changes each year. In June, we bring on a new coterie, and I work with that select group over the years. And it's just a really special way to bring art into the hands of different clients all over the country and to be able to connect in a smaller, more relational way. I love the partners that I have with the coterie, and they have really supported my work, and it's a lovely friendship.
Is that something that your studio manager set up for you? Because I'm wondering, how did you initially get that huge database? And also, how do you switch groups? Do you tell them this is a limited contract and you can't do 2 years in a row or 2 cycles in a row? It's going to be somebody else. You have to get at the back of the line. How do you manage that?
We just had a large email base of people that were asking questions. We kept up with that designer database of emails. And then on social media, when we began the coterie, we just began to publicize that we were going to be working with designers in this way moving forward. Yes, my studio director set up the application process and all of the details that go into that. We have a very clear set of guidelines with how we work with the coterie, and that involves explaining that the membership works from June to June, and then they're welcome to resubmit an application in years coming forward or not. And we like to try to work with different people every year, and so it ends up being different. So there's no set way that someone might either continue or choose to take time off. But it's really made it a very clear and easy way to work with a very small group of designers. And then if someone's interested, we say, please put your application in next year, and perhaps it will be a good fit in the future.
That sounds like a great solution and an avenue that I don't think, is necessarily a prolific avenue for fine artists to consider. It's a great fit, huh?
Yes, it is.
So congratulations on your new book. And I'd like to talk about that for a minute. And you're using Ballard? Are you printing with Ballard? So how did that come about? Tell me a little bit about that project and how you ended up getting the publisher. How did that stream come into play?
Yes, I had an editor reach out to me last October and say, hi, we are aware of your fine art. Would you ever be interested in writing and illustrating a children's book? And I said, well, you know what? I wrote a story about 10 years ago, and I have it as a file on my computer, and I've not done anything with it. Would you be interested in taking a look at it? And so I just sent the file off, not knowing if anything would come of it. And the editor reached back out to me. And so that just began the process of illustrating and bringing this little story into the world.
And something so meaningful to you.
Yes. So 10 years ago, when my oldest child was the same age as the main character in the book, Marisol, the book's called Marisol's Dress. When my oldest child was that same age, I looked at her and imagined, what if I put her on an airplane to fly across the world to another country to start a new life without me, where she didn't speak the language and she knew nothing of what she was about to face. And you see, that was my mother's story as a refugee fleeing Cuba as a little girl. And it wasn't until I was a mother myself that I understood the magnitude and trauma of my mother's own story. And so I wrote it as an act of understanding and empathy for my mom. But it wasn't till 10 years later that it was actually going to become this little book. And I see how the timing is so perfect because my art needed to develop over those 10 years. My voice creatively needed to develop, as well as the platform that I have with collectors that are excited about my work and are now excited about the book. So it wouldn't have been the right project 10 years ago.
It's interesting how all of the different opportunities, they don't happen overnight. I mean, someone can look at you and say, she's everywhere. She's got all these different things going on. But as you said before, it is important for our listeners to remember that it's an evolution. You can't pre-think it and demand it to come into being all at once. It has to evolve, and there has to be some room for the creative energy to flow in and match you, your style, and everything that is coming into play in your own life. There's got to be room for that creative growth.
Yes, I often compare my career to the fable of the tortoise and the hare. If you're familiar with that old story, the tortoise and the hare have a race, and the rabbit, of course, bounds off and is moving ahead very quickly, and the tortoise is slow and steady and plodding along. And of course, we all know the outcome of the story. The tortoise wins the race. Well, I say that that's been the same journey that my art career was on, because it's been very slow and very steady and taking small steps over the past 20 years. And also, I said a no to a lot of things for years so I could be present and available for my children and my family. But you know what was actually happening during all that time I was saying no? I was reading children's books aloud to my kids for years. And I was looking at children's illustrations, and I was developing what would ultimately be the foundation for writing and illustrating my own book one day, but I didn't know it. It was the slow and steady steps of the tortoise that now are coming to fruition. But yes, it did not happen quickly, and it wasn't all at once.
Thank you for that. So I see that you have over 44,000 Instagram followers, speaking of happening all at once. I assume that was gradual as well. Does your studio manager handle the social media? Give us just a quick idea of how long it took to get to 44,000 followers.
That's a good question. I believe I've been on Instagram for maybe 6 or 7 years, and it was gradual and slow. I remember that first year, I think I had 200 followers and thought that was awesome. Like, look, oh my goodness, who are these people?
I'm like that too. I'm like, I got to follow her. My husband's just like,
Yes,
yes, you got to follow her.
yes.
I
So
appreciate
I
each one of
really
you.
know. Yes,
Yes.
totally. And I think, like in any building of a brand, it's little bit by little bit building awareness. And I think by partnering with galleries, people found out about my work, and with people engaging perhaps with my work in someone's home and then looking it up, or being in a gallery on a trip and then saying, oh, that was the artist that I saw in Atlanta. I'm going to look that up. I just think it's happened gradually over time. So that wasn't something that happened overnight either. And I actually do run all my own social media. I photograph in batches. So when I create a new collection of work, we take it to a white wall in town that is my little secret spot to photograph. It's actually behind the Apple store in my little town, and it's a blank white wall, and it's next to the dumpster. And I've been photographing my work there for a long time. It gets good light and it's a blank white wall, and that's how I wanted to photograph work. And so if I can get a kid to be in a picture with me, I'll say, okay, somebody come and be my model with my work. And if you come, I'll pay you in Starbucks. So I get some ready volunteers. Sometimes it might be Chick-fil-A. So I'm not breaking child labor laws. They're getting paid for their modeling. But that really started because I needed to be able to show the scale of the work. When a painting is next to a person in a photograph, you can see how big it is. So I just needed bodies in the work. And so I just started photographing with my kids. And of course, now I've been doing that for years too. So it's a very organic process. I'll take a batch of photos, and then usually in the morning at some point, I'll just decide which photo I want to use, what goes well with my feed. I usually do a rotation of a painting by itself, a painting in an interior, a painting with a person. I rotate through. If you look at the way I do Instagram, I have a little formula, but it's not a very tight, studied thing. It's just, okay, what comes next? And then I've chosen to use some gratitude exercises. I've been journaling for 20 years, and every morning I write lists of things that I'm grateful for. And so a lot of times my Instagram captions are just my organic gratitude lists of the things that I've seen to be thankful for that day, because I believe the process of art is a process of seeing, and the process of gratitude is having eyes to see with thankfulness as well.
I love that. I love incorporating those two things into Instagram. So am I correct then that you're not doing a huge amount of videos of yourself doing the artwork? You know, that's all, of course, in vogue right now. And I have the cameras. I just haven't done a lot of that myself yet. So I'm curious if you're doing any of that.
Perhaps that's something I'll grow into in the future, but that's not something that I've really paid much attention to right now.
That's encouraging because you're obviously extremely successful with the social media presence. So about how many paintings would you say that you make a year then? I mean, I'm sure it's different every year, but any way to quantify that? Just depends.
It just depends. I think every year is different. So according to inspiration and time and whatever the year holds, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
I'm curious because I know people ask, well, how fast do I need to paint to make it my livelihood? And how many, they want to know these concrete things. And I think that your answer is appropriate in that there really is no formula for each person. It's different depending on the circumstances, the type of art, the size of each piece. You might produce 3 huge paintings a year if you're selling them for 20 grand each. It depends on the circumstances of your journey.
Yes, I would totally agree with that.
I think so. And I think your story proves it. I mean, you've got such a unique path, but it's working in its own organic evolution. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And thank you. And thank you for coming on the show and talking to us about all the different things that you're doing and your incredible work. So please wrap us up with your best advice for artists who long to be where you are, making a living, making their art.
I would say my best advice to an artist that is young on their journey is to bring as much creativity and artistic inspiration into their life via all the mediums of art. Visit the theater, go to the museums, make sure you're checking out books from the library, watch old films, go eat creative food. Make a creative date for yourself at least once a week where you step outside of your normal life and you input in new things to see, smell, taste, touch, feel inspiration in, and then watch and see how over time your voice develops out. So I really believe all of us need to bring a lot of art into our lives so that way we can be creating our own art to share with others.